Hello, my name is Ryan Beam, and I'm a student at the University of Kentucky studying economics and statistics. In this series, I just want to explore how data is used in the real world and how people build careers at the intersection of data, technology, and business. Today, I'm joined by Chas Fiorenza, a customer engineer at Google. Chas has a background spanning electrical engineering, big data, and cloud platforms. Chas, thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. Excited to be on the channel, the pod. I don't know, do we call it a podcast? I think
Sure,
it's,
yeah, all of the above. I really appreciate it. All right.
yeah.
So just to get us started here, I just kind of want to get into a little bit about your career and some of the pivots you've made. So I know you started in electrical engineering and sensors and embedded systems. Then you transitioned into FedEx and working with analytics and then big data at Coca-Cola, and now customer-facing roles, with Microsoft and Google. So my question is, if you could just kind of walk me through those transitions and what initially pulled you into the more data related roles.
Yeah, so my career has definitely taken some turns and some twists. Like you said, I started in traditional engineering and electrical engineering, and looking back at that time, I was able to change the curriculum a little bit with different electives and also with my internships. So through that, I was doing a lot of um, embedded systems work and kind of embedded programming with microcontrollers. So if you're not familiar, basically, you take your car for example. There's 1,000 microcontrollers in there, and doing basic things like maybe your an example would be like your window in your car, right? So you press the button, your window goes up, and maybe there's some sensor going on where in case your dog's nose is sticking out, it doesn't come up too quickly. Um, and so the software that's actually running on those microcontrollers, that's what I was working with was embedded software. And I was also doing a little bit of signal processing work. That was some of my favorite electives. Um, and that's really kind of designing digital filters, and all of these things involve writing code. So I think I was studying electrical engineering. With those that aren't familiar, probably don't think of writing a lot of code, but it did end up being that at the time. And then I think I learned a lot about myself through this internship and through my undergrad work. And I decided I want to do something a little bit closer to the business and something a little that wasn't so heavy on independent work. So I love building things, I love designing things, but I did find it challenging just to be sort of isolated from the business and have no idea what sales is doing, no real interface with the customers, and also just a lot of heads down work. So I took a big pivot after undergrad and switched into analytics at FedEx. Uh, and I was really close to the business there. So I was like in the operation. I was actually My office was in a distribution center, and I was also doing a bit of ETL work. So we had a giant Teradata instance at FedEx, and I was kind of a SME on the Teradata instance, and so from there, I was learning a lot of data engineering. Um, and I guess what I was looking for out of my next role was something a little more technical. So it's kind of like the Goldilocks parable, right? Like it was started off maybe a little too technical, and then maybe not technical enough. Um, and at Coca-Cola, I was really doing a lot of heavy data engineering. So I was creating Spark jobs, building things in Azure, learning a lot about DevOps. And from there, I transitioned to Microsoft and Google as a customer engineer. Um, so yeah, kind of a long story short, a lot of turns along the way. But I, I think when you look at people working in cloud, working at Microsoft or Google, a lot of people do have this sort of uh, twisty, turny career path. Because if you think about cloud maybe 10, 15 years ago, um, I don't think they were teaching a lot of that in school. So people were just picking it up on the job and kind of running operations for clouds in all these different industries, whether it's um, different startups and things. And a lot of those people ended up working at Google and Microsoft later. So, anyways, long story short, I guess like looking back, what connects all these different things is, I've been writing code my whole career in one way or another, and working with people that whole time. That's definitely something I've found fundamental to what I need out of a job. And then I guess the last thing is my title has been engineer throughout that whole time. So, say those are like the three things.
Right, that's really interesting, and thank you for sharing. And I've always found, career paths that are, like you said, twisty and turny, really admirable, and honestly something that I can see for myself because I'm really love to go in a million different directions. So we'll see how that all turns out for me. But that's really interesting, and thank you for sharing that. I would like to get into a little bit of more of like the nitty-gritty details, of the different things you've done. So I know one of the things you've done is you now hold an MBA, which is kind of speaking to that business side. And that's something that, at least from what I've seen, isn't as common for, people who have had this deep technical experience like you have. So I was just curious, how has that shaped how you approach problems from the business perspective and communication between, the people who are more technical versus less technical? What were the trade-offs with pursuing an MBA and the decisions that get made? And overall, how's your overall outlook just changed with the MBA?
Yeah, good question. It is true. I mean, I think most of the people I work with don't have an MBA. I don't know if any of them do that are doing the same job as me. Um, but I do think it helps with in my current role. I end up talking to CDOs, CTOs, CIOs, and it is nice to have some common vocabulary and really just be able to sort of, I guess, carry conversations in the way that they do. And um, yeah, I think I learned a lot of the vocabulary through my MBA. I remember my first course was an accounting class with Dr. Zebart. I don't know, is he still there?
I'm not sure. He might be. I
Oh,
don't recognize the name, but I may have just not
oh,
been in
okay.
class yet.
Yeah, maybe he's moved on to something else. But um, I remember we were going through a problem, and I had no business background, right? Like been technical my whole life, and we're working through this problem, and I kind of like leaned over and like to the person next to me, like, where did we get the answer here? And like, oh, it's on the income statement. I'm like, what the hell is an income statement? It's just all brand new to me.
Yeah.
So I do think it was helpful in those ways. And I guess the other way it was helpful, um, I remember when I joined Coca-Cola as a data engineer, I was talking to my hiring manager, and we were talking about my MBA. He's like, I don't really care that you have an MBA. Like, I hired you to be a great engineer. But it did show that you have a bias for action. You take initiative. You were not just hanging out in your free time after work. So I think it helped in those ways. Are you thinking about getting an MBA?
It's something I've considered. Grad school in general is one of those things I've just kind of had to bounce around my head a couple of times, but I have considered getting an MBA kind of out once I've gotten into the workforce a while, kind of like you did. But
Yeah.
But yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. That's really helpful for me, especially as I go forward and think about those things. And now I'd just like to shift to, you kind of said right there where you got into Coca-Cola and got into the more of the data engineering side. And I know you had probably approached a lot of those topics and skills before, but what was the biggest part of how your mindset had to shift when you went from more analytical to the more data engineering side?
Yeah. I think the biggest shift was learning more of a software development mindset. Um, so in the analysis, analytics world, especially at FedEx, we were doing a lot of one-off analysis. So it would be like a big project looking at where a new distribution center should be, or impact the network of adding a new flight somewhere. And with those type of analysis, you don't care like how much it costs. So, or you're not thinking about all of these software engineering concepts like scalability, SLAs, like, all these things that are important in the data engineering world of like, oh, hey, what happens if this pipeline breaks at 2 a.m. on Saturday? Like, who's fixing it? What happens when we go from uh, one person consuming this data to 50 different applications or things like that, right? So it's really the scalability, I think, is the uh, biggest piece that was you had to learn about. Um, but yeah, are these things you're learning in school? I just thinking back to like my computer science classes, it was a lot of data structures and algorithms, and not necessarily DevOps pieces or cost consideration stuff.
Right. Well, from my own experience, I actually kind of in a complete opposite situation of you from you to where I've kind of started out in a less technical path and I'm trying to shift into a more technical path. So, kind of with the econ side, I'm not getting into that. But on the data and statistics side, less so of the software development and DevOps and things like that. And it's just been more just, well, I'm still a sophomore, so I haven't got into the upper level courses yet, so I can't speak on that. But it has been more of just the statistical side of things. Then in my own free time, I've had to kind of think about those things and just build side projects because one of the things I do is I actually have a small e-commerce business that I run. And so within that, it's given me the opportunity to kind of practice these things that maybe, I'm not getting covered in class. So I recently built a database and it's now on AWS. And that was something that, 4 months ago would have been completely impossible, but I learned a lot through that. So I would say, less so from the coursework, and more in just, kind of having fun outside of class.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the best ways to learn stuff, right? And I'm interested to hear a little more about this e-commerce platform, but I'm sure you experience some of these things, right? Like now you have to consider what happens if I make a change to my database and like my e-commerce site goes down for an hour. Like,
Right.
okay, well, there's some kind of impact there now.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the coolest parts of it, just because it shifted from, I just sell on eBay mainly, but I started having questions I wanted to answer and not having the data to answer those questions. So then, I think one of the coolest parts for me about it all is that I'm the head of the company, the data engineer, the data scientist, the data analyst. I'm the person who has to fix things at 2 a.m. So it's all me, and so I think that's been a like informational process because I've gained an appreciation for the different sides of how data works because I am completely connected and responsible for all of it. So that's how I've really appreciated, like you said, the if something breaks at 2 a.m., it directly affects my bank account. So it's been a very cool experience, and I'm still learning a lot from it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, I'm always working on some kind of side project, and it's actually looking back at my career, that's been something that helps with interviews like multiple times. So I think that's a great thing to be working on.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And, and like you said, it's learning through doing just things on your own time. And, it's fun. And I think that's always been a good way for me to learn. And I'm excited to do it going forward. So, and you said you're always working on side projects. Do you have any right now that you're working on, especially in your, kind of your free time right now?
Oh yeah, so I do. I just a fun side one. I recently bought a house, so I'm getting into home automation stuff. And I have a another side project. I've got a cluster of Raspberry Pis running
Okay.
Apache Spark right now. So um, yeah, a little wild of an idea, but it's been fun.
Yeah, no, that is super fun. That's kind of I have, this long laundry list of someday maybe projects, and one of those has been to kind of experiment with some Raspberry Pis and kind of maybe a home lab at some point. But it's, I don't even have enough room in this apartment right now for that kind of thing. So, but yeah.
Yeah,
All right. Well, that's really
awesome.
exciting, and that's good to hear. And I would like to kind of shift into the work you're doing within your career right now, because When I see your title and I see customer engineer, and I know it's related to all these different business aspects and data practices, but what does being a customer engineer at Google actually mean from a day-to-day perspective and, responsibilities you have to take, and how does it differ from what you've had in the past and in some of those more data engineering related roles?
Yeah, good question. So the title is a little ambiguous, and for those outside the industry, so customer engineer at Google Cloud is the same thing as a solutions architect at AWS. And really what that is a sales engineer. So you know, a lot of times I have to explain this to my friends. I'm like, Chaz, what is it that you actually do? Um, and when I tell my friends I work in sales, they're like, what? You're not a sales guy. Like you hate golf, and it works a little different in cloud. So if you think about like your uh, average salesperson selling a car, the customer comes on the lot, they get them to sign on the dotted line, and they kind of move on to the next customer. Where in cloud, some of the beauty of cloud is you can spin things up and tear them down really quickly. So the relationships we have our customers are usually long standing, and it's not so much about getting someone to spin something up quickly that they're maybe not going to use. It's more about helping them build something that's going to be useful for them long term. Um, And so what that looks like day to day, I do a lot of architectural reviews. I do have a lot of conversations with customers, helping them pick services. So, if you're building something, maybe you're moving your application to Google instead of AWS, and you're like, hey, Chaz, there's so many different databases. Which one do I use? Could help with things like that. Do a lot of debugging. So customers maybe are moving Hadoop workload into the cloud and get snagged with something, and they need some help with the technical piece of it. Um, and so it's kind of a lot of different things, but the main idea is just helping customers build and move things into Google Cloud.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess just one last thing, comparing that to what I was doing at Coca-Cola, where I was actually on the other side, right? Like I was the customer building things on Google Cloud. Um, and in some regard, I definitely miss building things, but maybe scratch that itch by doing all these side projects. I don't know.
Right, right. I completely understand that. And it's cool you've gotten kind of both perspectives, both the selling side and the building side. So I'm sure that has, helped you a lot in your career and will continue to, pay dividends. So you also, I want to go back to a little bit about, you've said you've built things and you like doing things kind of alongside. So I think when I was looking through kind of your experience, I think I saw that you co-founded an LLC called Nimble while working at FedEx. So I was curious, if this was actually at the same time as you were working at FedEx, and what did you learn from running your own thing alongside a full-time job, and how did that shape your career, and how you approached the rest of it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, first of all, I was doing it at the same time, so uh, it was a busy time. I was getting my MBA at Kentucky. I was in the evenings doing PCB layouts and embedded software for Nimble. And really, what it was three or myself and two friends starting Nimble. And I think the biggest thing I learned was just how hard it is to spin up a product company. I mean, I put so much time into that and was doing it part time, and I could see that to really get this thing to take off as a product company was going to be, we'd have to go all in.
Mhm.
And the hard part about that from a product perspective is you don't have cash flows right away, right? Like you can say you're in development for a year, like, well, you're just spending money for a year. You're not bringing in any money for a year. Um, and I think the other thing I learned was just how many companies there are out there. Like any kind of like little product you can think of, there's already like 10 companies doing that thing. Like just think of anything random, like, all right, smart outlet or whatever, right? Like you look and there's like, wow, how did 10 companies already think of this and they're already building this? Um, which is cool, man. It just, it's just interesting how competitive it is out there.
Yeah, it really is, and it's cool that you kind of learned that, and going off that, when you said that you kind of realized you had to take it into a full-time operation if that's what you wanted to do. How did you make that decision? Was that something you're like, okay, this is not worth, the opportunity cost here is not worth going full-time? How did that eventually end, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, good question. So I think I just wasn't at that point in my life looking for that instability.
Hmm.
So my two partners, they ended up taking it full time, and they did some really cool things, and they're kind of doing something a little different now. But um, for me, I wasn't ready for that instability, and it really just makes me respect anyone that takes a startup from launch and makes it something successful, because it's tough.
Right, completely agree with that. Now, kind of just looking more into your role and how it's evolved over time. You've seen a lot of different technologies being used and how skills evolve. But now, kind of looking into the future, where we're now a little bit of at an inflection point when it comes to AI and machine learning platforms. So I was just curious, looking ahead, what skills or ways of thinking do you think matter most for these data-related roles, whether that be data engineering, data analytics, or the fields that you've worked in? Within the next, 5 to 10 years. And I know that's hard to, fully predict, but what do you think?
Yeah, it definitely is hard to predict. I think 5 years ago we didn't have large language models really taking off yet, and who would have saw that coming? But I guess some trends I'm noticing in the data engineering space, I think that maybe the traditional data engineer doing ELT work in a data warehouse, writing different SQL queries, I think that role maybe looks different going forward, especially with more event-driven architectures and more streaming workloads. Things like maybe fraud detection, right? Where you've created some model or used some statistics to figure out which transactions are fraudulent. You really want to act on those right away. Right? It doesn't help you if you do some analysis and have that on a dashboard a day later. Um, and I think this is true for all insights, right? Like the faster you can act on an insight, the more useful it is. Thinking back at FedEx, if we could predict which packages were going to be late, but we couldn't figure it out until an hour before it was delivered, like, okay, well, that's probably not useful to the customer at all. So, thinking about that, in order to act on these insights, a lot of times you need to connect with other applications. Um, and, and in order to do that, I think that involves more software engineering skills. So I think you'll end up seeing a lot of those on job boards, like job postings for data engineering roles, is some of those more software engineering skills, DevOps, different languages other than Python and SQL. Um, yeah, and I think the same with the data science piece as well, where more ML ops works into data engineering. So you have things like uh, you're trying to run inferences on the data, and you kind of need to be familiar with the tools the data science side of the house is using to train models and run inferences, things like that. um, yeah, that's kind of where I see the space going.
Yeah, absolutely, and I really appreciate your perspective on it. It can be hard to see kind of how the landscape's evolving when I'm in a classroom most of my time here. So yeah, that's really interesting, and I appreciate that. And kind of going off that with how everything's evolving, and I know you've jumped across different roles and different skill sets. So I was kind of curious, just from your own personal standpoint, what excites you? What kind of problems or projects? Really exciting you the most right now, or you think might come up in the next couple of years?
Yeah. um, So one of the things I like talking to customers about is sort of development workflows. So I see a lot of customers decide, okay, we're going to use BigQuery for our data warehouse, and then sort of skip all the way to the end and start writing SQL jobs. Um, and I like the piece in between there of thinking about, all right, well, do you have any kind of testing, unit testing? Do you have any kind of version control? How are you incorporating AI into your workflow? That's huge. And I think that's evolving quickly now. We had on the Google side, we had Gemini Assistant baked into IDEs like VS Code, and then we had Gemini CLI now is really popular, and we've released the whole IDE now. So all that stuff I think is really interesting. Um, and then just on the data engineering side, I think any problem that is like, have you heard of the 5 V's of big data? It was kind of
I didn't
a,
know there was five. I knew like velocity and some of those, but yeah.
yeah, I don't know if I could name them all, but like the volume and velocity ones are cool, right? Where you're maybe have so much data, you're not sure if your hardware can handle it, or if you have, you're trying to do something in low latency. That stuff's always really cool to me.
Right, that is really interesting, and that's, it's cool to hear what, still excites you about it. And I'm very interested, especially from the AI side, where everything's changing with AI. How that can be embedded into systems, and that's something, like I said, where my e-commerce business is a little bit of a testing ground for these things. I'm kind of excited to, just plug in new things to my database and see what works and see what doesn't. So, yeah, I really appreciate that perspective, and kind of as we come to a close here, I was thinking back to all the great information you've given me throughout this whole conversation. And I know you've given me a lot of good advice and things I'm excited to reflect on. But I did want to just kind of, ask one final question: is if you're in my shoes, 19 years old, studying economics and statistics, trying to build a durable career in a landscape that is ever evolving. What advice would you give me about where to focus, or just general advice you would give me?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great space to be in right now. Um, Going back to what we were talking about before of like predicting the future, I actually had a similar conversation with my manager recently, and we are talking about skills that are going to be useful in 5 years, and how do you add value on top of a large sequence model like Gemini, right? Like how can you be more like what are you bringing to the table that the model can't bring to the table? And I think he had a really good perspective. He's a longtime Googler, been at Google 15 years or so, and he's seen a lot of different things change in 15 years. And his answer was basically like, Chaz, I mean, we can't predict 5 years from now, so don't you know don't get too lost in trying to predict the future and where there's going to be career opportunities. I think that's really hard, but I guess my advice would be just focusing on figuring out where your passions are. And I think, you know, you're already spinning up some side projects, and those things are great for figuring out what's really interesting to you. And um, yeah, I think you'll be most successful just going down the path that you're most interested in. Especially you like in interviews, if you really care about something, it will come through on the interview, and people will be able to tell.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess not the most specific advice, but that would be my advice.
No, that's awesome. I still really appreciate that advice, and yeah, that's really a really good perspective that I'm excited to think about and carry into the rest of my learning career and eventual career. So thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Go Cats.
Go Cats!